Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that I found very particularly interesting. This is going to be a video overall about Mr. Naoya Inoue. And Naoya Inoue, of course, for those of you that have not recently heard the news, Naoya Inoue overall, of course, has recently become undisputed, I believe, at the 118-pound division. So now I believe that that makes him one of the few completely undisputed fighters in all the boxing right now. Also counting Mr. Jamel Charlo and Canelo Alvarez, and I don't really know overall who else may be completely undisputed right now. But if the big heavyweight fight between Alexander Usyk and Tyson Fury does end up happening next year, there, of course, overall, whoever is the winner of that bout, they'll, of course, join the discussion. So it should be very particularly interesting. But Naoya Inoue overall, and I thought that I would review this video from DontaesBoxingNation. I thought this video was very particularly interesting because Naoya Inoue has a lot of different opinions about him. There's certain people that believe that he could be the number one pound for pound fighter. There's certain people that believe that he should at least be, at the very least, top 3 or top 5. And there's some people that believe that he shouldn't even be on the top 10 pound for pound list at all. What do I truly believe about Naoya Inoue? I think that, in my view, he would be on my top 10 pound for pound list, at least, somewhat there within the bottom 5. But I don't know if I could really debate him top 5 pound for pound. Once again, for you to really make my top 5 pound for pound, you have to usually, debatably, have a very, very decent win in your career, maybe even a couple. Like Canelo Alvarez, when Canelo ended up losing to Dimitri Bivol, there's still so many A-grade wins that I can take a look in his career and say, you know what? Yeah, he ended up losing to Dimitri Bivol, but look at all the names that he beat. He beat Caleb Plant, he beat Billy Joe Saunders, he beat Callum Smith, he beat Danny Jacobs, he beat Arasani Lara, he beat Gennady Golovkin, he beat Miguel Cotto, he beat Sergey Kovalev. All those guys, when he fought them, were A-grade fighters, at least on some sort of level. When it came down to whether they're on the A- level, the A+ level. But some of those guys that I just mentioned, they were on the top 10 pound for pound list when Canelo Alvarez was able to defeat them. When Errol Spence Jr., he's in my top 5 pound for pound. If he were able to lose his next fight, or if he were to lose his next fight, at least he can claim that he had an A-grade win over Kell Brook. Now, of course, Kell Brook, he did end up losing to Gennady Golovkin right before he fought him. But, still, it is what it is. I still give credit to Errol Spence because Kell Brook didn't have to fight Gennady Golovkin, and that pretty much was a Kell Brook that still had a little bit of skill or still a little bit of goodness left within him. After that, he pretty much was done after the Errol Spence Jr. fight, that is. And of course, he also beat Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, and Mikey Garcia. When you talk about Tyson Fury, he was able to defeat Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko. And on top of that, Dillian White, when you take a look at someone overall like an Alexander Usyk, he was able to defeat some decent cruiserweights overall that, in my opinion, some were A-grade, maybe some were not, at least on the A- level. But of course, the biggest win of his career is when he went up to the heavyweight division and beat Anthony Joshua, who at the time overall had a very decent resume overall and had 3 out of the 4 main belts, and he completely embarrassed him on 2 separate occasions. So those are the fighters that are within my top 5 pound for pound. And even turns Bud Crawford, at least he can claim that he has the wins over Yuriorkis Gamboa and Sean Porter and maybe a Postal. I wouldn't really claim that Postal, in my opinion, is a clear A-grade fighter. But at least at the time, it was looked at as somewhat as a 50-50 fight. But I wouldn't really claim that that's an A-grade fight. But Terrence Bud Crawford, when he did defeat Yuriorkis Gamboa, and Gamboa actually was favored to win that fight. When you take a look overall at Crawford versus Sean Porter, that clearly, in my opinion, overall was Terrence Bud Crawford's biggest win of his career. I don't know if Nonito Donaire, or excuse me, I don't know if Naoya Inoue has truly ever been in a fight, in my opinion, to where he hasn't been somewhat decently favored. And some people may personally disagree. And that doesn't always mean that, you're not fighting decent competition just because you're decently favored over your opponent. But I don't really know if I can count Paul Butler or a 39-year-old Nonito Donaire when it came down to it with already several losses on his record, or an Emmanuel Rodriguez. I just don't know if I can count these guys as A-grade fighters. I think that what Naoya Inoue has done so far, I think that is phenomenal. I believe that he ended up winning a Super Series tournament and the Muhammad Ali Trophy. He's now completely undisputed, and I believe he's at least a 3-weight division champion. But in my opinion, there's only one thing that he has to do in order to possibly become a top 5 pound for pound fighter, and that's go up to 122 pounds. At least I believe that that's the division that I'm thinking of, and beat Steve Von Fulton. Because if he ends up beating Steve Von Fulton, then in my opinion, he will prove to me overall that he is just as good overall as what a lot of the hype has been about. And that's not me saying that he's overrated necessarily overall or that he's a person that is just all hype. But I think that if you are going to place him in the top five pound for pound, I just don't think that he truly belongs there. So it is what it is. At least not until he shows against a fighter that more than likely can someone handle what he brings to the table. Because until that happens, you really never know how truly great a fighter actually is. So it is what it is. But anyways, we're going to see what Mr. Dante's Boxing Nation has to say. Let's tune in.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Inoue, he knocks out Paul Butler to become undisputed at the junior featherweight division. Paul Butler was about a 40-1 underdog, and it was mainly because he had already previously been knocked out before by a guy who had a record of 17-3. Now, this is not Inoue's fault that these are the guys that he's fighting to become undisputed, but the problem is it leaves a lot of questions. We still don't know how good Inoue is until we see him fight better competition. Inoue is the same boxer that said he has never even trained with a black boxer before, let alone sparred with one. So he wins this belt against Paul Butler. The last belt that he won was against a 40-year-old Nonito Donaire. And one of the belts that Inoue got before he won the two belts against Donaire and Paul Butler, it actually was handed to him, meaning he didn't have to earn it in the ring. So listen, at the end of the day, while it is definitely a hell of an achievement to become the undisputed champion in any division, if you're just comparing Inoue to other Japanese fighters and the greatest Japanese fighters, then that's really impressive. But if you're comparing his achievements to other fighters that are currently undisputed today, then it's not that big of an achievement. We know that when Devin Haney became undisputed in a way deeper division where he had to beat an undefeated champion in his prime that just beat Teofimo Lopez, that just beat Lomachenko, who they were praising as pound for pound the best fighter in the world at the time, at least the majority of old media. Can you guys imagine what old media would say if Devin Haney had to beat Paul Butler to become undisputed? A man who already had 2 losses on his record, doesn't have any big wins over Teofimo Lopez or Vasil Lomachenko. He just happens to be a fighter no one has heard of that has a belt. Just imagine what they would have said about Devin Haney in that scenario.
Well, listen, what I'll state is this, and I have to somewhat agree with Dante's Boxing Nation here, and some people may disagree with me, but it just is what it is. Naoya Inoue, in my opinion, I just don't think all in all that he still has, as of yet at least, fought the greatest of competition. Very similar a little bit to that of a Terrence Bud Crawford. But even Terrence Bud Crawford, once again, has at least a couple of debatable A-grade names. Not saying that that's all Naoya Inoue's fault. But if he is going to, once again, make my top 5 pound for pound, he is going to have to defeat someone like a Steve Fulton. It just is what it is, because that's a fighter to where I can take a look and say, you know what? That is someone all in all that can give Naoya Inoue a true challenge. And if Naoya Inoue is able to beat him or even walk through him, then I'll say easily he at least has a debate there within my top 5 pound for pound. But I just don't think overall that I can really quite put him there yet. I need to see more.
Yo. Imagine
And
if
to be fair, to compare to the Devin Haney situation, I don't think that Devin Haney beating George, I don't think that George Kambosos, in my opinion, I don't ever really think that he was a true A-plus fighter. But at least one thing you could say about George Kambosos is that, as Dante said, he was the man that ended up beating the man that beat the man overall when he beat Teofimo Lopez. And then Devin Haney fought George Kambosos, unified the division, and he completely embarrassed him twice.
It was Devin Haney who beat Nonito Donaire, a 40-year-old Nonito Donaire. And that's one of the champions that...
Well, Nonito Donaire, in my opinion, he actually was decent when Naoya Inoue ended up beating him the second time around. He was coming off of 2 wins, I believe, against undefeated prospects. But even then, I still don't know if I would debate that Nonito Donaire was really a clear A-grade fighter. I would say that maybe if you wanted to debate because of overall, maybe the motivation that Nonito Donaire had coming off of those 2 wins or the sharpness, maybe you can debate that it was A minus, but Nonito Donaire was 39 years old, and it was very clear at that time that he really wasn't going to beat any elite fighters. Nonito Donaire had already lost to several fighters at that time, not just including Rigondeaux, also Carl Frampton, Naoya Inoue the first time around, and maybe even another fighter that I'm not thinking of as well.
Haven't had to beat to become undisputed. We know what time it is. The bar is always set so low when it comes to fighters that are on the hope list. And the hope list, it doesn't mean white fighters, it just means anyone that is not black, because these are always the fighters that non-black Americans will root for against the black American boxer. I know he's a really good fighter. He's a really good champion, but he's not a top 5 pound for pound fighter. In fact,
I would have to agree with that.
he's really not a top 10 pound for pound fighter. And if Inoue was black, all
Well, what I'll say is this: Naoya Inoue, in my opinion, with his accomplishments and his dominance, I think that he clearly has an argument to be in the top 10 pound for pound. But top five, I just don't know if I can do it. Once again, because that means that I would have to put him above fighters like a Terrence Bud Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., Canelo Alvarez, Tyson Fury, and Alexander Usyk. I don't think I can put him above any of those guys. It just is what it is.
of you guys would be agreeing with me. You would be saying there's no way that guy deserves to be on the pound for pound list. Look at his record. Who has he beat? Right? These are the same fans that say this about Gervonta Tank Davis when Davis is beating much better competition than Inoue. And once again, this is not a
Well, I would say that in certain regards that maybe he's beating slightly better competition, at least in certain fights. But is Devonta Tank Davis really fighting way, way, way better competition? I would say maybe slightly better competition, but Devonta Tank Davis really hasn't been fighting the best of the batch either. I mean, he's been fighting guys now for his past few fights that have never really even been champions. Isaac Pitbull Cruz and Rolando Romero, Mario Barrios, those are not guys that are ever going to be A grade fighters.
Inoue's fault. He just happens to be in one of the weakest divisions in the sport right now. But actually, now that I think about it, it is partially Inoue's fault because he also avoided Guillermo Rigondeaux. He avoided him for years. So he fights.
Well, did Naoya Inoue really avoid Gilmore Rigondeaux for years, or did he just not fight Gilmore Rigondeaux when he was no longer a factor? Now, someone correct me overall if I'm wrong. I'm not necessarily sure. But by the time that the Naoya Inoue versus Gilmore Rigondeaux fight really was brought up, I believe that was when Gilmore Rigondeaux already lost to Vasily Lomachenko. Rigondeaux really overall was not really even a factor overall once he lost to Vasily Lomachenko. He was completely done after that. There was no more Gilmore Rigondeaux left. I mean, maybe a little bit, but he clearly overall was on the down spiral. And Gilmore Rigondeaux really has not even had an official title in his career until really about five or 6 years ago. That was the last time that he really overall had a legitimate title. So I don't really know if I can debate that Naoya Inoue completely ducked someone like a Guillermo Rigondeaux unless I actually see an article or some proof to where it says Naoya Inoue completely turned down a fight to where it seemed like Guillermo Rigondeaux was a factor.
Nonito Donaire, but he won't fight the man that beat Nonito Donaire when Donaire was actually in his prime and was considered pound for pound top 3, one of the best fighters in the world, and dominated him. That's not how the greats move. So while
Once again, though, Dante, is is that really something that actually overall has some relevance, or are you just overall trying to tear down Naoya Inoue's name? Did he really avoid Guillermo Rigondeaux, or did he just not fight him because he was no longer a factor? Now, once again, I could be wrong, but I never really remember Naoya Inoue turning down someone like a Guillermo Rigondeaux or saying that he didn't want to fight him. Now, I remember a couple of times to where it appeared that that fight had a little bit of appeal, but then Guillermo Rigondeaux went on to fight someone like a John Riel Casimero, and he ended up losing that fight. Now, a lot of people, of course, thought that Guillermo Rigondeaux could have won that fight. I probably would have scored it for him, but Rigondeaux also could have threw a hell of a lot more in that fight, so it is what it is.
Haney had to be George Kambosos, who beat the man who beat the man. He's scheduled to fight Lomachenko.
And if you're asking me overall, do I believe that Guillermo Rigondeaux would have beaten Inoue Inoue, at least within these past few years? No. I don't think that he would have. I just think that Guillermo Rigondeaux would have been too limited at this point in time in his career. And to be quite honest with you, he seems to have a little bit of a problem with the upper echelon fighters as well.
Next.
And some people may say, what are you talking about? He defeated Nonito Donaire. right? But when he was in that Vasily Lomachenko fight, and I get it that Lomachenko probably was about, 1.5 to 2 weight classes bigger. But at the end of the day, he got his ass so whooped when it came down to, I mean, he had no answers whatsoever. He couldn't even land a single punch in the fight. And then on top of that, against John Rio Casimero, I mean, I probably would have scored it for him just because I thought he was the more accurate of the two. But at the end of the day, he could have done a hell of a lot more. And of course, he ended up losing in his last fight as well.
Assuming he beats Lomachenko as well. And then you have Gervonta Tank Davis, who's scheduled to fight the Garcias, Hector and Ryan Garcia. How does that make Inoue's resume look?
Right, but is Hector Garcia really that great of a fighter? Dante is trying to make you believe that Gervonta Tank Davis is fighting these Mexican killers. Hector Garcia, or these Latino killers. Hector Garcia overall is a decent fighter. He's not a guy that's ever going to be an A-grade fighter. Ryan Garcia is the true talent, in my opinion, that Gervonta Tank Davis is eventually going to fight. But a lot of these other guys, they're not true A-grade fighters.
Best wins on his resume is Paul Butler and Nonito Donaire. Now, since we remember how they
The
promoted,
best ones, I believe, overall in Naoya Inoue's career would be Emmanuel Rodriguez, Nonito Donaire, maybe Jamie McDonnell overall when it comes down to it. And there might be another one that I'm forgetting. But anyway.
old media, how they promoted Devin Haney versus George Kambosos for Undisputed, the real Undisputed title. You guys may recall, all of a sudden, they start making it seem like Undisputed wasn't even really a big thing. In fact, after Devin Haney became the Undisputed, the youngest Undisputed champion in boxing today, ESPN, they actually put him on the list for about a week. And then they end up removing him from the list. Once again, this was right after Devin Haney became Undisputed. So I was really wondering how they were going to promote this fight when it comes to Inoue, who's fighting Paul Butler for Undisputed. And someone sent me this article from BoxingScene.com, where someone wrote an article entitled it, Inoue Enters Historic Bout, a Monster Favorite Against Butler. So you notice, he calls it a historic bout, right? And then he talks about him being a monster favorite. Remember, I told you, Inoue was like a 40-1 favorite going into this fight. But BoxingScene.com, they actually tried to justify those odds by defending Inoue, attributing this to how good he is, as opposed to how weak the opposition is. You know what? I got to read some of this so you guys really see what's going on. So this is what he said.
Well, Dante, I would somewhat agree with you, but once again, you do a lot of the same stuff with certain fighters that you like to defend, like that of a Gervonta Tank Davis or Deontay Wilder or Terrence Bud Crawford. When they fight guys that clearly are not on their same caliber, and you keep trying to state that, oh well, they're fighting guys that are undefeated, they're guys only know that are ranked in the top 10, right? But that doesn't always mean that a fighter is elite. It just is what it is. Like Deontay Wilder when he fought Robert Elenius was never going to be an elite fighter. Gervonta Tank Davis, Mario Barrios, and Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and Rolando Romero, none of those guys are ever going to be A-grade caliber champions. If champions ever. If ever legitimate champions. None of them have ever held a legitimate belt. And what I count as a legitimate belt is one of the 4 belts. If you don't hold one of those belts, in my opinion, you're not a champion.
In the article, he said the bout against Butler is, at least in the eyes of odd makers, one of, if not the most lopsided, undisputed fight in boxing.
And Stephon Fulton right now, in my opinion, would not be top 10 pound for pound either. Because he ended up beating, I believe, Brandon Figueroa. I believe the younger brother, of course, of former, contender Omar Figueroa. Whatever the hell, however you pronounce his final name or his last name. I don't really consider either of those guys, in my opinion. I mean, they're decent contenders. Would I really call them, complete A-grade fighters? I'm not really so sure about that. Now, of course, Brandon Figueroa, he did beat the very talented Mexican prospect, I believe, Luis Nedry, or, whatever overall his name is. Or not Nedry, excuse me. What the hell was his name? God, I can't remember. But overall, the very hard-hitting Mexican fighter, all in all, I can't remember his name, but he ended up knocking him out. But I don't really think that Brandon Figueroa is really an A-grade fighter. So Stephon Fulton has a little bit more proving to do, in my opinion. So this is actually a great fight for both of them. Because if either of them, if Stephon Fulton wants to make the top 10 pound for pound, in my opinion, he's going to have to beat Naoya Inoue. if Naoya Inoue, because of what he's already accomplished, if he wants to now enter into the top 5 pound for pound, he has to beat Stephon Fulton.
History. This says more about Inoue's ability than any lack of that Butler may have. Butler is a consensus top 10 divisional fighter and a two-time world champion, yet the best bookies see him as a 40-1 underdog, and some lines have been even wider. Now, before I continue, notice how the guy says, this says more about the ability of Inoue, and then he talks about how Paul Butler, he's in the top 10 of the division, not the top 3, but the top 10. But he never shows Paul Butler's record. He never explains to the readers that Paul Butler has 2 losses and has been knocked out before by a nobody. As if this has absolutely nothing.
Well, I do agree with you, Dante, once again on that point. But there's also certain people that you like to defend overall when they fight certain fighters that really are not that good, and they've already lost or been knocked out before. Like Terrence Bud Crawford fought that of a Kell Brook or an Amir Khan. Those are allegedly A-grade wins. No, those are not A-grade wins. And just like I would say here, no, these are not A-grade wins. Or Paul Butler is not an A-grade win. All right, it is what it is. Just like when Gervonta Tank Davis. Now these fighters are never stopped, but Rolando Romero, Isaac Pitbull Cruz, and Mario Barrios, those guys, they're never going to be A-grade fighters.
To do with the odds being so wide. Let BoxingScene.com tell it. This says more about Inoue's skill, how talented he is, that he can be a 40-1 favorite to win a fight, right? Guys, where were these articles at when Devin Haney was fighting George Kambosos? Where were these articles at when Gervonta Tank Davis was fighting against Rolly Romero, fighting against Mario Barrios, fighting against Leo Santa Cruz, Isaac Cruz, and now Hector Garcia and Ryan Garcia? All of those fighters I just named are all better than Paul Butler. But yet we didn't hear one single
I would agree with that
person from old media saying, this says more about how skilled Devin Haney is. This says more about how skilled and talented Gervonta Tank Davis is. Almost no matter how good the opponent is, when it comes to somebody on a coincidental list, we don't see any articles like this from old media. Well,
I would agree with that. But once again, Dante, we're also not going to see any complimentary features from you or any of the LDBC or new media channels of Naoya Inoue or Canelo or any of these other fighters. So it is what it is, whatever. But at the end of the day, at least just my view of it, when you're a 40-1 favorite against a fighter, that's not a fighter that's going to do shit, at least in my opinion. Even Floyd Mayweather Jr. for how great he was, or Manny Pacquiao, even when they fought a fighter that, clearly they were favored against, but still was looked at as a very, very decent fighter, they still overall would only be about a 5-1, maybe 7-1 favorite, maybe some odds, 10-1 or a little bit more. I'd have to look specifically. But when Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought Miguel Cotto, now, of course, that still was one of the bigger fights of his career. Probably one of his top 5, top 3 biggest wins, maybe even debatably. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, I can guarantee you that Floyd would have never been a 40-1 favorite overall in a fight like that. When Fury overall fought someone, even like a Dillian White, he was not a 40-1 favorite. So my point being is this. Paul Butler and a lot of these fighters that Inoue is fighting, they're not really overall the best of competition. Not saying that it's all Inoue's fault. And not every single one overall has been, in my opinion, just a tomato can. I don't think that, when Nonito Donaire fought him last time, I don't think that he was the worst opponent. Of course, he was coming off of a little bit of a groove. I believe that he potentially had a belt. And on top of that, all in all, he was able to defeat 2 undefeated prospects. But still, he was 39 years old, and it was very clear that Nonito Donaire, that he pretty much had reached his limit to what he was going to accomplish in boxing. He already had a few losses.
Tell you guys right now, the curse that old media puts on all of their favorite fighters, it is now on Inoue. And
I already said this when it comes down to it. As soon as a lot of these guys are trying to claim that Naoya Inoue is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter, new media is going to come straight after him. Once again, they claim all the know that a lot of their issues overall is with double standards, and to a degree it is. But another big thing that they have a problem with is when they see a fighter like Inoue or Canelo or someone else like that ranked debatably as the number one pound for pound fighter because they can't have that. Now, in my opinion, Naoya Inoue, it's very justifiable overall to criticize him as the number one pound for pound fighter because compared to a Canelo or Lomachenko when they were ranked number one pound for pound, they at least had a decent resume. But Inoue, in my opinion, I just don't know if I can claim that at the current moment in time. But we'll see once again what happens because if he does end up beating Steven Fulton, it is going to change a lot in his career.
Means is usually once old media they start pushing and praising a particular fighter, saying that he's the greatest fighter of all time. Like right now, they just came out with an article saying that Inoue is number one, top 100 greatest fighter over everyone. They're saying he's the Michael Jordan, the LeBron James, the Kobe Bryant of the sport today. Well, guys, usually when old media starts praising one of those fighters like that, they end up losing shortly after that. This happened to Roman Gonzalez. It happened to Golovkin. It happened to Canelo. And once Inoue moves up to 126, where he's really going to be facing some serious resistance because he's going to have some serious competition, and he'll finally get to either train or fight a black fighter like Stephen Fulton, that's when Inoue is most likely going to lose. Because I'm
Well, I think that is going to overall be at 122 pounds, but I could be potentially wrong about that. I would have to see. But anyways, overall, it is going to be very particularly interesting. But to bring up Dante's point there once again, because Dante will he'll try to overall tell you overall that some of these other fighters that they're fraudulent. And don't get me wrong, some of these fighters they are pushed overall because they don't want certain black fighters to be ranked number one pound for pound. But Lomachenko and Canelo Alvarez, in my opinion, they were the number one pound for pound fighters at the time when they were ranked there, especially Canelo Alvarez, no doubt about it. Now, of course, he did end up losing to Dimitri Bivol, but Canelo Alvarez, when you take a look at all the names that he has beaten, it's very clear all to know that he has great pedigree.
telling you right now, if Inoue struggled to beat Nonito Donaire in their first fight, there were times in that fight where Nonito Donaire was actually outboxing Inoue. And Donaire has never been known for his boxing IQ. If Inoue struggled against someone like Donaire, and we're not talking about the 25-year-old Donaire, we're talking about the 40-year-old Donaire. If he struggled against that Donaire, he's going to have a very hard time beating someone like Stephen Fulton. And from what I've been told,
Well, we'll see overall what ends up happening, but I do understand Dante's point. But once again, I don't do fight math. I need to break down the fighters individually. I need to see both of their styles. I don't watch them necessarily quite as much as other fighters that I've seen, but they both are very, very decently good fighters. So it's going to be very particularly interesting. But that is the matchup that is going to need to happen if both of those fighters want their career to go a bit further.
took Inoue 2 tries to even make the weight in this fight. He's already said that he's planning on moving up to 126. He said that 126 will be the highest weight class that he'll move up to. And it seems that it would make sense that he would move up now because he's pretty much conquered a weak division. And if he wants to really be considered top five, one of the best fighters in the world, he's going to have to see someone like Steve Fulton. Because
I agree 100% with that.
even Stephen Fulton has beat better competition than Inoue. So let's see.
Well, I mean, Stephen Fulton overall, once again, he was able to beat Brandon Figueroa. Once again, I think he's a decent fighter, great fighter. No, not really. So the competition really, I mean, if you were going to debate that, it's a little bit better maybe than Inoue's best win. I mean, maybe, but I'm not really even sure if I would 100% debate that because the Figueroa brothers really all they are once they get in the ring with an elite fighter, they're pretty much just Mexican punching bags. That's pretty much all they are.
Let's see if Inoue, if he's going to move up to 126 and really challenge himself, that's when we're going to find out how good he really is. You know,
I agree.
guys, the reason why it's so easy for old media to push these agendas, to say whoever they want, whoever they like, is the greatest fighter of all time. He's the best fighter. I don't care how weak his resume is. He's the best because we say so. The reason why they're so comfortable with spreading this propaganda is because they know that no one will ever check them. And what I'm telling you guys right now.
Well, I somewhat agree with that, Dante. And once again, if you're going to allege someone like a Naoya Inoue is the number one pound for pound fighter, no, I just don't think that that can happen. But the problem with Dante is that a lot of the times he also tries to allege certain fighters, even fighters on the know that he claims overall are overprotected, or fighters on the know that are all hyper, on the hope list. And you can claim on the know that they're on the hope list all you want, but you have to know the difference between a fighter that actually has a resume and one that doesn't. And Dante, even with the fighters that clearly have pedigree, someone like a Tyson Fury or a Canelo Alvarez, two fighters that clearly, in my opinion, deserve to be on the top 10 pound for pound list, he still even tried to detract from those fighters. So Dante really, I don't think he really knows the difference between what is a good resume or isn't, or more than likely he does. He just overall can't really admit it with certain fighters.
Is all of these black boxers that are always on Instagram dissing another black fighter on some personal stuff that's really not that serious. If some of these fighters with big platforms, with big names, were to start using their platforms the right way and start exposing these double standards, asking people, how is it possible that Inoue is considered better than all of us? Look at his resume. Look at my resume. I mean, we see some of these black fighters say this stuff about other black fighters real quick on Instagram and Twitter.
Well, you know what, Dante, once again, I don't really have a huge problem with that. But for someone overall who is so quick to detract from Naoya Inoue, even though overall he is a Muhammad Ali trophy champion, and all in all, he's a three-weight division champion, severely dominant, and on top of that, he's a guy that just completely unified the division. For someone overall that's going to detract Naoya Inoue because apparently he doesn't have the best of resumes, you certainly had no problem placing Terrence Bud Crawford at the number one pound for pound spot and still do. And Terrence Bud Crawford, once again, out of any top 5 pound for pound fighter that I have on my list, he clearly has the weakest resume out of all of them.
When they're going back and forth beefing, but how come it's always off limits when it comes to old media's favorite fighters? I mean, we got fighters like Javante, Shakur, Devin, Errol are beefing, but how come it's always off limits when it comes to old media's favorite fighters? I mean, we got fighters like Javante, Shakur, Devin, Errol Spence, Terrence Crawford, Jamal Charlo, or Jamel Charlo. They all going back.
So what DontaesBoxingNation just told you is what his main motivation has been all along, which is always what I've said. Dante just told you, when it comes to our fighters, he said our fighters, new media's fighters. So what is new media about? It is a pro-black media. That's all it is. And don't get me wrong, once again, I think that it's good overall to stick up for black fighters in a sport all in all, to where there can be certain double standards against them. But you have to be logical and objective with that. You have to be very careful with that. And Dante, a lot of the times, is not.
Forth. Meanwhile, old media is saying that Inoue is better than all of them. I'm telling y'all right now, man, it's time to put the tea down and wake up. Because a closed mouth don't get fed. And it's a real serious case of famine going on right now. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. Let me tell you guys about Issa.
But anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that was very particularly interesting. But anyways, thank you all so much for watching, and we will see what ends up happening with Mr. Naoya Inoue in the near future. And I do agree with Dante's main point that if he is going to join the top 5 pound for pound, he is going to have to beat Stephen Fulton. There's no other way around it. It just is what it is. But anyways, that's really about it for today. I just thought that would be very particularly interesting. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.